First, I'd like to thank you all for attending this professional skills and personal development webinar titled Diversity and Inclusion, which is hosted by the Northern California section. Before we get started, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes highlighting ACerS NorCal's mission, and then I'm going to pass the mic over to David Ho, who will be the MC for this webinar. So ACerS NorCal mission is to connect those interested in ceramics, material science, and engineering from academia, industry, national and government labs, and students within the Northern California area. And our core focus is on career development, networking, outreach, and collaborations. And the way that we aim to achieve this is through seminars, social events, professional awards, and outreach. And so the core events that we have coming up in the near future is an in-person meeting at UC Davis, and we're planning that for early 2022. And we're also planning a material science student experience day at UC Davis that will probably be occurring in late 2022 or early 2023, where we'll be engaging with some high schools in the area. So from 2020 to 2021, ACerS members in California have increased by 3.33%, and we've been fortunate enough to have a 20.68% increase of NorCal members. And what's kind of interesting about this is that if you actually look at the distribution where we've actually had this growth percent-wise, it's actually been the more broader counties, that being Butte, Merced, Santa Cruz, and Shasta counties. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is it kind of highlights how these webinar styles interactions have really promoted people in more rural communities getting more involved with ACerS. So the ACerS NorCal team is currently made up of Adrian Redosa, who's the recruitment secretary, Andy Nito, who's the funding secretary, Jenny Beach, who's the treasurer, Samuel Zhu, who is the events secretary, as well as David Ho, Daniel Chafee, as well as Laura Roberts. And our current leadership advisory team is Sylvia Johnson and Jim Shackelford. So with that, I would like to begin this event by passing this over to David Ho, who will be the current MC. Thank you.
Good morning to you all, or for those of us joining from Central or East Coast, good afternoon. Let me get my slides on the screen. All right, let's get this show on the road. This is just a quick breakdown of today's schedule. We'll be having our speakers from academia, Dr. Bowman and Dr. Tull. They'll have a total of 30 minutes allocated with a 5-minute Q&A afterwards. Dr. Tull unfortunately couldn't make it to the webinar, so her interview is pre-recorded. And then Dr. Brosnan and Dr. Breder from Collins Aerospace and Saint-Gobain will talk next. Each has about a 10-minute window, followed by a 5-minute Q&A. And then finally followed with Dr. Goski and Dr. Dickey from ACerS National, each with a 10-minute slot and then a 5-minute Q&A afterwards, followed by a open panel discussion at the very end. That'll run about 20 minutes. And so we'll start off with Dr. Bowman. If you could share your screen, you may take the floor.
Thank you, David. Pleasure to join you today. It's always good to be in Northern California, having spent some time there. Even if I'm only going to do it virtually for today. Thank you for inviting me as well. I'm speaking from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC. It's the 4th university I've worked for. I spent 23 years at Purdue. I spent 4 years at Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago, south side of Chicago, and then 2 years at San Francisco State University before coming to UMBC 4 years ago. I'm speaking to you virtually at many places today, but also including places that previously had indigenous folks, and these are their ancestral lands. I'm actually speaking from the ancestral lands of the Piscataway, among other indigenous groups. The statue I show in the middle on the slide is actually a statue that used to be in the park near my home in Baltimore City. It was put up in 1980. And when they put it up, apparently they didn't do a background check of Captain John O'Donnell. He had been an owner of as many as 30 slaves at one time. And so we took that down in the middle of the night last year in Baltimore City with no press, et cetera. It was taken down and removed by a claim for the neighborhood. It's interesting to discover that the neighborhood that you live in is actually a neighborhood that was previously really a urban plantation in the United States. And so I'm acknowledging that that's among the lands we speak from. In the promotion of this, there was some discussion of the idea of a pipeline. This is actually the Alaska pipeline, a picture overall. So sometimes people talk about a STEM pipeline. It turns out most of us didn't follow a pipeline to get where we are. Pipelines, the whole idea is no one leaks out along the way. Really, I think our overall plan for success and career success, particularly if we want to be inclusive, particularly want to be inclusive in the ceramic society as well, is we have to think about ways for people to leak out and leak back in, or to take pauses in their careers, and to have there really be a little bit more like on-ramps and off-ramps than a pipeline. But pipeline, it turns out, as a language, was adopted in some reports actually quite a long time ago. There is it turns out somebody has written wrote her doctoral thesis on this. This is a quote from her doctoral thesis from Heather Metcalf, 2011 PhD from the University of Arizona. It describes the process overall. So that set of sums, which you can read, I'm not going to read it out to you. It's in a National Research Council report describing the STEM pipeline. Turns out there's not many digital copies of this. I haven't actually found a hard copy of it, so it's not a great view. The picture that was included in the National Research Council report is the following report, which shows all the different pathways that are possible. And my argument is it doesn't really look like a pipeline, right? And this is really the process from which people start out as K through 12 students, or start out as immigrants, end up going through an educational system, and then potentially to industry or potentially to academia, including all the on-ramps and off-ramps along the way. And so whenever I hear someone talk about it being a pipeline, I don't think this picture looks at all like a pipeline. It looks a lot more like something you'd learn in an ECE, electrical and computer engineering course. And usually for materials engineers, circuits was not our favorite course. So we probably don't think that much of this overall diagram. But we're here really to talk about ceramics in the material science community. I actually am chair of the American Society for Engineering Education Data Committee, which harvests the data from all the engineering colleges and many of the computing programs in the United States. And so I just show three things here. The bottom axis on each of the plots is the last 5 years, 2016 through 2020 of recorded data. And it's for material science and engineering bachelor's degrees. It's the fraction of women in the top slide, the fraction of African Americans, and the fraction of Hispanic, Latino, Latina folks that we see. You can see that we're about a third women in our bachelor's degree programs, and this is in degrees received, that there's no progress, and the numbers are very small, as it turns out, for African Americans within our field, even though the field has actually been growing in degrees produced overall. And there's a little bit of progress for Hispanic, Latino, Latina folks. I can take this data further back 5 more years and 5 more years, and really there has not been that much progress even in the prior decade. If you're interested in that topic, you can look up some of the other things that I published. You can look on my LinkedIn profile. I published some things that give further back data. This is actually the most recent data that has been produced by ASEE. If you look within the populations on the bottom 2, among African Americans, there actually is more gender diversity among the African American population. So within that 3% or so for bachelor's degrees. Turns out there are more women than men. Turns out there are less male engineers overall going into MSc compared to other disciplines. And you can see that it's similar, that there's similar pretty high gender diversity in the Latina fraction. Now, all of this varies by institution, varies by the markets and the regional areas where folks are. And I think that that's always an important thing to think about. So I decided to, based on where you are, is to regionalize this a little bit. So this is the Pac-12 plus. So we're promoting UC Davis into the Pac-12 and adding it onto the data. So these are the material science programs in engineering colleges in the Pac-12 plus UC Davis. And you can see that in 2020, that there were 212 bachelor's degrees total. 4.5% of those were African Americans and 9.5% were Hispanic Americans. And by the way, when we calculate that fraction, we subtract out the percentage of international students. So that's the domestic fraction of the students, which is pretty typical in how this type of data is produced. You can also see on the right-hand side is PhD degrees, and there were 105 PhD degrees granted amongst those institutions in 2020, and you can see the percentages there as well. Compared to engineering overall, MSc is essentially at the bottom. We have one of the lowest fractions of African Americans and Hispanic Americans of any engineering discipline. We compare comparably to chemical engineering in that sense. There's variations by discipline. It turns out the engineering discipline with the highest fraction of African Americans typically is electrical engineering. And the engineering discipline with the highest fraction of Hispanic, Latina Americans is mechanical engineering or civil engineering, depending on the campus. Just to give you some data on faculty, and this is national data of the 1,119 listed tenure track faculty in the United States in 2020. 29 were listed as African American, 65 were listed as Hispanic American within that population. That actually hasn't changed much across the past decade. And if we do the Pac-12 plus, you can see the numbers as well. So that's the information that I wanted to present. I just wanted to provide some kind of context and provide some overall pieces. And I'm happy to either answer questions or wait till you watch the presentation from Renetta. I will do a preview of Renetta. I worked with Renetta here at UMBC. We were very disappointed that UC Davis recruited her to UC Davis. We were very happy for Renetta, incredibly happy for Renetta, because she's great, but she used to be in my college and I used to get to see Renetta almost every day, and I miss that tremendously. And I will stop sharing here.
All right, thanks, Dr. Bowman. Let me slides back up. And I had fast forwarded a little bit too quickly before your segment. I just wanted to add a slide introducing our speakers. So I think Dr. Momi did a pretty good job of introducing yourself, but since Dr. Tull's not here, Dr. Tull is the University of California, Davis's inaugural Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She formerly served as the Associate Vice Provost for the Strategic Initiatives at UMBC, and also as Director for the University System of Maryland. She's currently on the Chief Diversity Officers Council for the University of California, and she's also an adjunct professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at UC Davis. Dr. Tull's degrees in electrical engineering and speech science are from Howard University and Northwestern University, respectively, and she has faculty roles at UW-Madison, University of Maryland College Park, and also UMBC. And with that said, Scott, if you could cue up the interview.
Welcome, Dr. Tull. So I guess where I want to start is just quickly we'll do an intro question, talk a little bit about yourself and your background. What was your pathway to becoming Vice Chancellor of Diversity, equity and inclusion at UC Davis. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that decision that led you to that point?
I can. And first of all, thank you, Scott, for the invitation. And thank you, David, for moderating this session with me. And I do have to say a hello to my friend and colleague, Dr. Keith Bowman from UMBC. So it's really a pleasure to be on the program with him. So my pathway to being Vice Chancellor of DEI, a very interesting path because it wasn't something that I was really looking toward in my career. I trained as an engineer, electrical engineering. I went to Howard University for electrical engineering, Northwestern for my master's, and then my PhD was in speech science. And my work was in speech recognition, but for pathological voice. And so it was very interesting that I had been interested in disability, in accessibility and access. And so in that sense, I had been looking at different ways of having different communities involved in technology. Now, when I was a graduate student at Northwestern, being one of the few Black women who was there, when it came time to start to recruit for new graduate students and for diverse graduate students, of course, I was one of the students who was brought into the room to talk to prospective students, to work with new faculty, et cetera. And so my interest was spurred there. I was also part of the National Society of Black Engineers, had been a member since I was an undergraduate student, so very aware of a variety of issues related to diversity in engineering. But I sort of took a traditional path, did a postdoc, became a professor for a little while, and then I worked with my husband in entrepreneurship, actually, tech and
Awesome.
and well, the interesting thing is it wasn't a great experience because we experienced a lot of negativity, and there was a lot of racism there, unfortunately. He was building out an image processing company, and there were a lot of things that we learned along the way, things that we thought really didn't exist anymore, that really did, sort of in the back rooms of pitching for VCs and so forth. So it was a very interesting experience, and I eventually decided that I wanted to get back into academia, which is how I came to UMBC. I applied for a position that was open due to a grant from the National Science Foundation to develop a program that was going to help to increase the numbers and diversity of graduate students who would go on to be professors. That program was an AGAP program, Alliances for Graduate Education and the Professoriate. We named it Promise, and then I stayed for 15 years building that program out and then working with undergraduate students. My portfolio grew. By the time Dr. Bowman came to UMBC, I was a professor of the practice in engineering and had a chance to work with members of his team and his front office and the dean's office there, continuing to talk about diversity in engineering. But there were headhunters who were coming and who were asking about some of the work that we were doing and how I could replicate and scale that at other places. And eventually I said, okay, well, let me take a look at some of these opportunities. Davis was a wonderful opportunity, one of them that was in the pile. And of course, with our president, Dr. Gary May, an engineer himself, having formerly been the dean at Georgia Tech, it was very attractive. And University of California, Davis also had a track record of starting to work with diversity. They had already developed a strategic plan for the university to boldly go for all the Trekkies out there. Then there was a D&I strategic vision as well that people had started working on in 2013. And so all of those things were very attractive. Coming to California and part of the UC system, learning something new, certainly a bigger university with 39,000 students. It was a great challenge, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for that. That's definitely a very long, and that's a lot of really good experience that you're bringing to the position.
Thank you.
So I guess what I'll do now is I'll just lead off into the questions.
Sure.
So one goal of this webinar is to educate and challenge biases. Dr. Bowman spent a lot of time talking about his leaky pipeline metaphor and provided a lot of great examples to try and improve talent retention among the underrepresented in the engineering disciplines. However, addressing any kind of problem begins with looking at the underlying root causes. And so we need to recognize that there is no single factor behind the underrepresented, minorities, women leaving engineering. What would you consider to be major factors behind this diversity drain in academia? And do you have any other recommendations in addition to Dr. Bowman's?
So let me sort of take what Dr. Bowman talked about in terms of leaky pipeline and go to another step that we use in sort of the DEI world. One of the things that we talk about often is that when you think about pipeline, you think of things that are in a single direction. But we try to think about, in terms of solutions, pathways, right? Different pathways, different on-ramps, and ways that people can perhaps sometimes diverge from a pipeline, go to different pathways, but then have a variety of different ways where they can re-enter. And we have to create those pathways, and we have to create them and validate them and make sure that people know about them. So if we go back, of course, we usually go back to K-12, sometimes pre-K-12, and talk about exposure. So we all know that, you know, there are gender divides with how young girls are exposed to engineering and science versus how boys are exposed. And then there are even differences in classes. I think that the research talked about in 7th grade, how there are differences in math between the ways that sometimes girls may respond to math questions versus the way that boys respond. It's not that they don't necessarily know the answers, they just may be conditioned in a different way, or they may just be socialized in a different way. So one of the first things is thinking about who can participate. There's been a little bit of a challenge that we started to look at even in Davis Public Schools related to who's participating in some of the, and I'm going to use these air quotes, gifted and talented programs. And in engineering, you know, we kind of grew up with this thought, well, you know, a person sort of has to have the knack, right? They have to have the knack for engineering. But what we have found is that people from a variety of different backgrounds may have a version of the knack that's different than someone else's version of the knack. And so you have to really give people an opportunity to grab hold onto levels of curiosity that may not necessarily be in a particular pipeline or one particular path. There may be several paths where people can be part of the enterprise. So I'll use an example that a colleague of mine from Rice University used when he talked about exposure. He said that he would go to these schools, these elementary schools and middle schools, to talk to students about engineering and math and science, and that the guidance counselor would have a small select group for him to talk to. And he would say, well, where are all the other students? And they would say, well, they're in the other class. And he said, well, no, I want to talk to all the students, because you never know who from the entire group may have an interest and who may have curiosity. And what they found is that sometimes people outside of the group that they chose really did have an interest in going to the next level and then participating in a special program. And so I think the first thing is to challenge who can participate. Another thing is to look at, of course, factors that are connected to life, connected to socioeconomic background. There are people who are going to college who are also supporting families full-time out of even a college job or a college stipend. And so there are those kinds of things. When I worked in the graduate school, there were students who were using their graduate school stipend to support entire families. And so understanding that sometimes there may be some stop outs, but are there opportunities for them to come back? And making opportunities available for that. There was a study by the Council of Graduate Schools that looked at time to degree. And what we found was that when we had the 7-year time to degree for the PhD, you had what looked like a lot of drop off, particularly among Black males. But when you extended it to 10 years, you saw the numbers come up again. And especially if those young men were involved in the program and they were continued, they had continued mentorship throughout, and they were told, you can come back, we're waiting for you, we're ready for you. Some of these things happened years ago. We just finished with Hurricane Ida, sort of finished with it. But back in Hurricane Katrina time, we had a lot of people who stopped to take care of family and so forth. And sometimes there are these ebbs and flows. And so we need to make sure that there are opportunities for people to return. We also need to think about mentoring, how we're mentoring, and that mentoring includes both the professional as well as the psychosocial mentoring. It may not necessarily come from the same person or the same advisor or the same professor. There may be a network of mentoring, and the National Academy's Science of the Effective Mentoring talks about that and talks about those different networks.
Great. And so reasons, so you touched on a major important point here, where letting people come back in, or not letting people come back in, but rather creating opportunities for people to re-enter or continue what they were doing. Can you think of maybe a few examples of what universities have done well to try and address that issue? Or if you can, if there are not many good examples, but maybe you can provide an example of how a university can better accommodate people trying to re-enter higher education.
Okay, so when we think about leaves of absence, why are people, first of all, encouraging people, if they need to take a leave of absence, to sort of go through the formal process of taking a leave of absence, but recognizing that they are still part of the university and continuing to engage them while they are on leave of absence, so that they know that they're still part of the university community. That's one thing. Sometimes when there are strict, hard and fast rules about, well, you know, if this doesn't happen, or if you don't get this grade for this particular semester, then you're just out. That doesn't help with people who may, again, have some special circumstances. They may be at a part of their life where something just isn't working right, but if you gave them another chance and they had an opportunity to just take a breath and take a break and then come back, you can see them come back stronger. So we have seen this happen again at UMBC, particularly in the graduate school, where people have taken a leave of absence, but they have remained connected to a program like at UMBC, they had the AGET Promise program. They also had an NIH program called the Meyerhoff Graduate Program. There's a Meyerhoff Undergraduate Program. At UC Davis, there are a number of different kinds of research programs. And so if those research leaders, and some of them are staff, some of them are faculty, but if they sort of take the mindset that our students are our students, when they come in, we want to have them for the longevity of their whole trajectory, from the time that they enter until the time that they graduate. And we're going to make a commitment to that. And making a commitment to the individual students, even if you have large enrollments, that's important, because the students are feeling like they came for a dream. They want to see that dream realized, but they need to know that there are people who are going to be behind them and people who are going to be supporting them. And sometimes they can get lost in big universities, and sometimes even in smaller institutions. So having some individualized learning, I know that with the challenges, the National Academy of Engineering's grand challenges, individualized learning is one of them. This can be a caveat or a piece of that. They might not necessarily have been thinking about it exactly in that way, but when we think about really catering to and thinking about people as individual human beings and seeing what we can do for them, recognizing that their humanity is so important, that they're going to make these great contributions to the world, then we can start to try to work with them as much as possible.
Great. Thank you. And so continuing on this train of thought, where we try and improve organization structures to better accommodate these different factors for people leaving STEM. Once you put this plan into place, how do you ensure that organizations stay accountable throughout all of this? It's very easy for organizations to say they're doing something and then simply either not follow through, or once the attention is gone, they just drop it. And
Yes.
so how do you, and for like one good example I like to point to is you have a lot of chief diversity officers that are hired by organizations that subsequently leave a year later just because they're either under-resourced or they're sidelined during the decision-making process. And so in your experience, how do you think people can address this?
So it's hard to do this kind of job if the commitment is not there from the top. And the commitment has to be there from the top leadership. The other thing is, I would say that UC Davis is having a level of success. And I'm not saying that, you know, we have it all together. I'm just saying that we are at least moving forward, we're advancing. But that's because the leadership is not just the chancellor and the provost, but other people on the leadership team, other vice chancellors, deans, vice provosts, faculty, have a united commitment to diversity. So UC Davis has principles of community, and we talk about those principles of community quite often. And we really try to live up to those ideals. And we try to at least have it so that members of the community at large are aware of those ideals and are also incorporating it. It's not something where you can just suddenly have a mandate and say, all right, we're going to be committed to diversity. We have to be committed throughout all of the strands of leadership. So we're talking about it in the Chancellor's Cabinet meeting. It's talked about in the Council of Deans and Vice Chancellors. It's talked about with deans and their department chairs. And then department chairs should be working with faculty. And then faculty should also receive support from academic affairs related to this. And then there's student affairs helping with students. And so it needs to be interwoven throughout the university. And one of the things that we have now are a lot of DEI committees, and our office helps to support a lot of those efforts. But as these DEI committees start to then tackle not just what the big picture is, but what are some of those micro issues that are happening in the individual units and departments, that's where some of the real and hard work is, because you have to deal with all of the different things that have happened in the background throughout the years, some of the injustices that have contributed to being systemic barriers, et cetera. One of the things that we're dealing with as our university is looking at a conceptual framework that was developed by two of our faculty, Maisha Nguyen and Lawrence Nguyen, called the 5 Pedagogical Stances of Transformative Justice in Education. And there are 5 stances, just really quickly, recognizing that history matters, race matters, justice matters, language matters, and futures matter. And so when we take that throughout the organization, and we're going to continue to do it throughout the next year, then that's a way that we can, again, get these kinds of mantras and tenets and goals for DEI into all of the departments so that it's not a foreign entity.
That's good. And so with all of this change that you're going to, or that organizations will try and do to try and improve issues, right? One thing they're very likely to encounter nowadays is the increased polarization that we have surrounding the conversation on DEI. Unfortunately, this should not be an issue where ensuring that everyone has equal justice, inclusion, but it somehow has become polarized. Do you have any advice for organizations on how to navigate this increasingly polarized discussion?
I actually have 2 thoughts. So first of all, the first thought is that, of course, it is unfortunate that when we think about inclusion, that there are groups who feel that inclusion does not include all people. When we think about inclusion, we also think about freedom of speech. We think about all of these things, and we're still trying to focus on human beings, and focusing on a certain group of human beings should not be at the detriment or at the exclusion of another group when we're talking about ability to live and breathe and work and all of these different kinds of things. But one of the things I think that often happens, particularly in DEI spaces, is that when there is polarization, then there can be a reticence to really tackle issues head on. So one of the things that we are doing this year is we're talking about that uncomfortable reckoning and the need to be okay with living in the discomfort, that this is not always going to be something that's going to make everybody feel good, because we just have unequal systems, and we have to be able to, as they say, speak truth to power and really showcase that everything is not equitable for all people. And it is okay to recognize that it's not all perfect. And once we agree that it's not all perfect, or even if we disagree that it's not all perfect, even if we disagree, it doesn't mean that it's not true. And so we have to continue to still try to work for a level of equity. Now, equity and equality are different entities. With equity, there is a recognition that there have been some historical barriers and some things that have rendered various groups and put them on unequal footing because of inequitable practices. And there has to be a recognition of that first, so that some of those wrongs can be righted as we go along. It will be polarizing. And I think that if we try to say, you know, let's get rid of the polarization, we can try. We can try as much as possible to understand all sides, to welcome all sides to the conversation, to try to find, okay, where is our common ground? So for example, when I talk to groups in STEM and engineering, you know, just from my engineering background, I try to get to the common ground of our love and our curiosity for discovery, for finding solutions to difficult problems. I often bring in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, and look at those and say, okay, across the world globally, we have these issues and we are all at least on the same page of recognizing that these are issues and that we have a level of knowledge or a level of expertise that can help to address these issues. Now, what does D&I mean in that context? It means that we can bring different perspectives to the table and different people to the table, and people who have various experiences and backgrounds, and they can think about things in a different way. And that helps to solve the problem in a better way. That gives you more opportunities in the experiment to have better results after the experimentation. So I try to get it to it that way, so that we're not sidelined by what's going on politically, but that instead we're looking at something from a common frame of reference.
Absolutely. And from my personal viewpoint as well, a lot of nuance is lost in the discussion nowadays due to the increasingly like emotional component of this discussion. And so we can all, when we do have conversations about this, just focus on nuance, making sure that, like you said, there's a common connection between the two parties, and strive towards just like a learning moment for everyone involved. Yeah, fantastic. Well, that about wraps it up. Thank you very much, Dr. Tull, for your time. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to come have this conversation with us.
It was a pleasure, David. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks again to Dr. Tull, even though she couldn't make it. I think right now, in the interest of saving time, we'll make time for one question if there are any. And then just a reminder to all participants, you can put your questions into the Q&A section at the bottom in Zoom, and we will get to the unanswered ones at the end of the webinar during the open panel section. For now, it looks like Sylvia Johnson had a question that Dr. Bowman answered. Do we have anyone else that has a question for Dr. Bowman? If not, we do have a question bank just to stimulate a little bit of discussion. Let's see, Scott, did you have any that you wanted to ask, or should I go off the list that I have?
Yeah, I think what a good idea here would be is if we can read out Sylvia Johnson's question and give Keith an opportunity to answer, so everyone can hear it, if those haven't been able to find their way to the Q&A.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I can read that out. And okay, so Sylvia asks, or she says, many international students stay in the US. Dr. Bowman's data excludes them, which is okay if it's remembered. However, looking at the faculty numbers, I suspect some or many of them were international students. Can you comment on the role of such students in contributing to diversity?
Yeah, and so I answered the piece on the data, and so I'll answer the piece on what is the meaning of that. So one of the interesting things that you can look at, and I can look at the college I'm leading now, but all the colleges I've been in. So in terms of international faculty and international environment, even employees overall, typically engineering and science colleges have much more international participation than the other parts of campus that feel that they're more diverse. So often an arts, humanities, and social science college may only focus on their domestic diversity and may not think enough about the international diversity that's brought into play. And so I think Sylvia's question, it's a great question, but it often ends up being an interesting dichotomy on a campus, right? Is that, who is leading in diversity and inclusion, or is looking at that. So we often are judged inside of campuses, but also even by society, based on what people see or what people think about. So I shared the numbers that actually the people think about us on, but it's also true that the environment we work with, I work with, and I'll do, 70% of the people I've hired at UMBC, I've hired 40 faculty since I got here, 70% of them have a bachelor's degree that was earned not in the United States, right? And so they bring that with them. Now, the real question is whether they decide to bring their international self in terms of talking about diversity and inclusion, whether they decide to bring their international self to actually work to try and make us be a better place. A lot of times in technical fields, we kind of don't think people should work on that part, right? And in engineering, sometimes we kind of take away from ourselves, right? And if you look at people like myself, you look at the very small number of openly LGBTQ people that are within our fields. You can argue, sometimes it's been said, and I know even within my time before I was out, it's something we don't talk about in engineering because we don't have to talk about our personal selves, right? We just talk about our technical selves. And so to me, I think that the question comes into, do we really leverage fully those international backgrounds of the people who are in our engineering and science communities to really help us understand how to be better and how to be more inclusive overall? And I'll just, as my last comment, I'm always happy if I'm on a group where there's so many people with initials KB on it. So just to preview the people who come next. So, but thank you, Sylvia, for the question.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bowman. If anyone else has questions, please submit it to the Q&A section, and we will address those we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. Okay, let me get my screen back up. All right, so next on the docket are Dr. Brosnan at Collins Aerospace and Dr. Breder at Saint-Gobain. They each will have about a 10-minute section to talk about their experiences. Let me get rid of the corner. Okay. Dr. Kirsten Brosnan joined Collins Aerospace in June 2021, and she is responsible for innovating, incubating, maturing, and transitioning emerging technologies that support a wide range of products and platforms within the Advanced Solutions team, from communications, navigation, and guidance business. Dr. Brosnan received her bachelor's in material science and engineering from Georgia Tech, and her master's and PhD in MSc from Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Brosnan is a fellow of ACerS and a member of MRS and Society of Women Engineers. Dr. Breder is Senior Principal, Group Leader at Saint-Gobain Research, North America. Prior to joining Saint-Gobain in 2000, Dr. Breder was a research staff member and group leader at the High Temperature Materials Lab at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And she also has experience from academic and government research work in Sweden and Norway. Her PhD in mechanical engineering is from the University of Massachusetts, and has a master's degree in physics engineering from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. So, Dr. Brosnan, oops, you have the screen.
Sure, I won't take the full 10 minutes, but I'll give a little bit more background, and I have a couple observation areas that I'll make some comments, and hopefully we'll generate some questions in these areas. But as David said, I have my material science degrees. I went to work for GE Research, where I spent most of my career, close to 14 years, first starting as a material scientist, and eventually when I left, I was leading a high temperature metals and ceramics group. We were delivering high temperature materials for industrial gas turbines, aviation turbines, and hypersonic technologies, and it was a lot of fun. Other roles that I had at GE, I was a program coordinator for Cultivate. It's a 1-year intensive program for top female talent, early and mid-career across the company. And it was really to give early and mid-career women the network and resources to advance in their career. So it was one of those leaky pipeline Band-Aids that GE put together. And it was a really great program that I met a lot of fantastic talent across the company in coordinating that program. Also, I had the pleasure to lead the Women's Network for the Capital District. So we had over 1,300 members. And I can't really speak enough of how important this group was to me in my career in giving me some early opportunities in front of leadership, presentation skills, and just visibility in what the company was doing as a whole, when you don't necessarily get some of those roles in your day job, if you will. So really great employee resource group to be a part of. And then later in my tenure at GE, I got to organize the WISE Symposium, Women in Science and Engineering, which brought together top female talent from all across the world at GE once a year to hear from folks from outside of GE and initiatives. It was interesting. One of the women that we had brought was actually in the news recently because of the bias in imaging or facial recognition. And I thought it was really cool that 5 years ago, she was at our WISE Symposium and we had identified her in some of those areas. So in 2020, I was recruited I left GE and I was recruited and I went to work at Superior Technical Ceramics in Vermont. They are a ceramic manufacturer for aerospace, defense, semicon, and some other markets. This company is very small, about 180 employees. In rural Vermont, about 15 minutes from the Canadian border. I was there about a year and I joined Collins Aerospace this summer. Actually, I think this is the most fun role I've had yet. I'm in business development, but I'm supporting the research teams in microelectronic packaging and wideband RF applications on early TRL technology. So, DARPA hard kind of stuff. And it's a lot of fun. So I get all the early hard technology discussions, but without the actual proposal writing because I'm on the business development side now. So outside of my day jobs, I've had a number of roles at American Ceramic Society that I think have been really helpful to my career in meeting folks like Scott and David and Beth and Keith and Kristen, actually everyone here, and Dana and Karen. I was a mentor to the PCSA, the most fun group at ACerS, by the way. And I'm currently the chair of the Basic Science Division. I don't even want to list all the committees, but I've been on a number of committees. I'm currently a board member at Materials Research Society. I am a mom to 4 kids. Another important part of my career. One is a sophomore in physics at Stony Brook, and the other one, my youngest, is learning to read right now. So we have the spectrum of what everyone is learning. I have chickens and bees and learning to garden and harvest apples and things like that. We're living the full Vermonty life, if you will, out here. And I'm a fan of music. I play mandolin. So that's a little bit about me. Some observations. First, I'll say there are some big differences, systematic differences between working at large and small organizations. I have a data point of like 1 or 2, but it's just something like I wanted to bring up as we're talking about D&I here, that, for those of you on this call that are considering a career in industry, it's just something to think about and really reach out to your network and have those conversations. I would like to reiterate what Dr. Tall said earlier. look at what is promoted from the top. If you don't hear top leadership, whether it's a small organization or a large organization talking about D&I, then it isn't important to the organization. And I actually made a career choice recently because of that. And I'll leave it at that. Mentors, whether you're at a small or big organization, it's good to find them. You're likely going to have to look outside of your organization if you do work at a small company. In larger companies, like when I was at GE, there was networks and ways to be paired with mentors. There's just differences in how you go about finding them, and how you get them and where they are. And then I guess the other point I'd like to leave you with is how to thrive in organizations of different sizes. And I think that that's kind of where this comes in here, using your professional societies, making time to not only do be technically good in your job if you go into industry, but taking that time to build your network, whether that's internal to your organization and also external, because you never know, it could be decades later when you might need that network. And you can use me as an example for that. So you just never know. And, I've always wanted to help other people, and I was really grateful when people were there to step in and help me when I needed it as well. So I'll leave it at that and let Kristen take over and leave time for questions and answers.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Brosnan. Dr. Breiter, if you could take the screen.
Sure. Thank you. Let me see. Come on. There we go. So I have 3 topics for just a few slides on 3 topics, sort of trying to address what systemic progress can look like. In other words, trying to infuse diversity and inclusion throughout the company as such. And some of the drivers for progress and support from management, and that has been mentioned a couple of times. And of course, there are a lot of things that remains to be done. Here's a picture of a gang of folks from Sangha by Research North America on our Diversity and Inclusion Day 2 years ago, when we still did that in person and not virtually. And it's a fun day where people from the employee resource groups and the various countries show up in their show off the best of their organization, their country, and the food is fabulous, and we have a lot of fun. And that's actually sort of partly virtual and partly in person happening on campus today, actually. So we have people here from about 30 different countries. Sangha by Research North America, and it's one of the 8 transversal research centers that Sangha has worldwide. Here we have over 350 researchers, and the gender balance overall has really improved, as you can see, especially, and we're proud that we have been able to hire a lot of women, so good percentage, than 50-50 of new employees. And you can also see the degree type, PhD, MS, MBA, BS, associate's degree, and trade school. We have a cadre here of experienced technicians who have been with the company for a long time that really carry a lot of the load of the work. So what do we think about with diversity and inclusion? So it's the spectrum of the infinite dissimilarities that distinguish individuals. Inclusion is, of course, then to be deliberate in the effort to create an environment where everyone is respected and empowered to contribute. And we think that's super important. And company-wide, Sangha supports this with actively supporting employee resource groups. We have the Sangha Women's Network. We have the LEAD network for ancestral researchers and people. We have the Early Career Network, we have Veterans Network, and we have the Live Open LGBTQ network. And our previous CEO just stepped down this year, and he's now the chairman, Pierre-André de Chalendar. He essentially, from the very top, stated, and he published on LinkedIn, the goal is really to change the rule of the game. And it's been said many times, this needs to come from the top, and in this case, the very top. As some of you know, Saint-Gobain is a French company, but we operate all over the world. And his goal is for this to be worldwide. By 2020, so in 2017, he stated that by 2020, we should have 25% of managers be women. And we're at 25.3% now. And 25% of executives should be women by 2025. And he states also some of the things that the company will do. Promote better work-life balance, improving our treatment of maternity, parental leave, more flexible organization, and mentoring and coaching. And these are all things that we've heard already today. So some of the actions to improve diversity is stated, and Saint-Gobain publishes what's called a registration document, which includes all the economics and how well the company is doing and metrics, and it's a big document, but it also includes these non-business things. Not only sort of goes under HR, but also on the work-life balance. And it's stated, promote inclusion and diversity in all forms, and equal treatment in the fields of recruitment, and that management shall be backing diversity in initiatives and policies. And also they're talking about ensuring a balance of composition age group-wise of the employees, recruitment and retention of people with disabilities, and then achieving those gender diversity targets. And in all countries now where the group operates, there is at least 14 weeks of maternity leave at full pay. For our colleagues in Europe, this is not a big deal, but for us here in the United States, that is a big deal. So the other thing that the company is doing in these same both registration documents and integrated report, we're measuring how are we doing. So one thing is setting goal and the CEO saying, yep, this is what we're going to have. Unless we measure things, and that's what Keith talked about as well, we need to measure what's going on. And I've picked out some, there are a lot of other metrics that get published, but here are some of the things that I think is important, and is to maintain what we call a high diversity index over 90%. And the asterisk here, you see the that means the proportional manager meeting one of the group's 3 diversity criteria other than France, and also a diversity experience. We want to have, as I mentioned, 25% female managers by 2020. We are now at 25.3. We want to have 25% female senior executives by 2025, and we're at 19 as of 2020, the last year we measured. And we also publish now the ratio of male-female wages, as you can see here, for all employees, as well as what we call junior manager. So again, in 2020, Saint-Gobain launched a program to use big data to essentially track the metric. How are we doing? And unless we measure, we can't improve. The Women's Network has been very active for many years in Saint-Gobain North America. That means United States and Canada primarily, and really to promote diversity and development potentials for women and inclusion here. The objective is to have a strong worker network of women in Saint-Gobain, help the company to identify women talent and mentoring, help the company attract talented women, and also help reduce turnover of women employees. And that speaks to what Kristen just said. We don't want to lose talented women because they don't see the commitment of the company to the diversity. We also have a resource group for LGBTQ employees. That's in North America. Again, Live Open. And the goal here is to attract and retain the most qualified workforce possible. And the mission of the Live Open is to promote unconditional welcoming environment of diversity, equality, and inclusion for members. And we want to have people bring their whole self to work. So that also speaks to what was mentioned earlier, that, you know, we're not only engineers, we are people with lives, and we are people with home life that is not this traditional or whatever it is. And we should be able to sit at the lunch table and talk about that as well. So if the case is so clear in the terms of why should we have diversity and inclusion, the arguments are very strong for all of that. Why are we not there yet? And D&I programs fail because they assume existing and potential employee targeted by these programs must change to fit into the current workplace culture. And Dr. Charles said this is not the way it needs to be. We need to change the culture of the entire place to make this work, to embrace inclusion of all levels, different gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background, nationality, difference in politics and thought. So we need to change the entire culture, and with support from the top, it is possible, but we also need the employee resource groups, we need middle managers, we need everyone to buy in. One thing that Saint-Gobain has had extreme success with is to implement a culture of safety. Again, from the top, it would say our goal is to have no accidents. And the Saint-Gobain in Saint-Gobain, the health and safety, they're really at the heart of our culture. And we live and breathe that. Safety is the #1 agenda item at any meeting, even my group meeting. And this has really, over the years, really infused the company, and it's our culture. And we live with it, we believe in it. And that's the kind of cultural shift that I think is going to take to fully implement diversity and inclusion in Saint-Gobain or any other organization. And as I said, I think our safety culture has shown that in a big company like ours with 180,000 employees worldwide, it can be done. So that's what I had on the slide side, and we can have this questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Breiter. We'll open the Q&A up if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, so I have a question for both of you. So as Dr. Tull kind of mentioned, right, it's this to get D&I to kind of work in any sort of organization, it needs resources need to come from the top, and as Kristen pointed out, sometimes those resources aren't necessarily available. So my question is if there is an individual that's in a situation like this, where they don't feel diversity and inclusion is being promoted, is there anything that they could potentially do as an individual to help try and spark upper management, if you will?
It's hard, but for individuals, but I think with individuals relying on colleagues maybe not necessarily within their organization, but within their professional network would be one thing. To make the argument for management that it's a clear business decision. It makes sense from a business perspective to have diversity and inclusion in your organization. You keep good talent. You have people who are fully there and not worrying about if somebody's going to out them the next minute. You have diverse backgrounds in research groups that are much more productive. There's a lot of data on this, and innovative than groups who all look the same and think the same. So there's a lot of business arguments for doing this. As an individual, it's hard to do, but seeking help from, say, what ACerS is doing here is one piece that can help.
I guess what I would add to that is that at larger organizations, there's ombuds processes. And so if it was a concern, that's certainly an avenue that one should take if you wanted to do it anonymously, to say, hey, this is an issue that needs to be addressed, that's an avenue. At smaller organizations, that's not something that is available. So usually, but you're more limited. But I would say, these employee resource groups, whether it's a GE or Saint-Gobain or Collins, a lot of them were homegrown and started with concerned employees. I think the women's network was the first at GE, but Pride and the veterans groups emerged afterwards, and larger organizations do lend themselves to being able to pull from a larger group of people to form those. But that doesn't mean you can't form them at smaller organizations too. And I'll just reiterate what I said earlier. It's not even just the funding of what is available to really have the support, but it's the mindset of who the leadership is. And if you don't have the leadership with the right mindset, move on.
No, thank you. Thank you. That answered my question well.
Yeah, thank you. And then we actually have a question from an attendee, from Ellen. She asks, how many large companies have ERGs?
Oh, that's a very good question. Actually, a lot. So right before the pandemic struck, so this is now in the fall of 3 years ago already, I was at a conference in Seattle with an organization that's called Out and Equal. And that's LGBTQ workplace group, and they have this big conference where they're essentially working with promoting equality in the workplace with this focus. And there were 6,000 attendees at this conference in Seattle. And there were employee resource group from a wide variety of companies, from Bank of America to Whirlpool to Deloitte, and so on. And us from Sangaba, that was the first time we had participated in that conference, and we were sort of newbies to this, and we felt a little bit like the poor relatives from the country, because clearly we did not have the experience that some of these other resource groups had. So that organization will probably tell you the number. I don't have that in my head, but it's quite a few and growing.
Yeah, I know IBM, Global Foundries, all the the big, top 5 defense aerospace companies have at least veterans networks and women's networks. Now, if you start getting down Asia Pacific networks, African American networks, it's spotty. And I would encourage all of you that are, if this is important, ask. When you're interviewing, ask your friends that work there. Just ask, because I know I thought when I joined GE that I didn't need it. When I found myself pregnant with twins, I was really glad there was a women's network and I had someone to talk to about navigating, work as the only woman in my group going through a pregnancy. And and the only woman in the group, period. So just ask, because I do think, you know, it may not be important to you, you know, when you join, but it could be down the road.
For Saint-Gobain, we are using information about the employee resource groups as recruiting tools.
Mhm.
It's prominently displayed, and when we interview people, we tell them that we have these, and I'm sort of doing an informal statistics when I start collaborating with new colleagues, and I said, I'm asking them, did this make, especially in this work, you know, this recruiting environment that we're in, did it make a difference to you in your choice to come to Saint-Gobain? Know that we have these employee resource groups, and I'm getting an overwhelming yes.
And for me, it made a big difference for me in going back to a large organization, because I do appreciate what those ERGs bring to the culture of the workplace.
All right, thank you very much. We're gonna keep moving on. We're gonna go on to our next speakers, Dr. Goski and Dr. Dickey. Let me get my screen share going. All right, just to introduce our two speakers, Dr. Goski is going to be speaking first. She is the Vice President of Research and Development at Allied Mineral Products, LLC, a global monolithic refractory producer headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. Dr. Goski earned her master's and PhD at Dalhousie, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Dalhousie University in Canada as an ACerS fellow. She is a member of the Refractory Ceramics Division and the Manufacturing Division, as well as an advisor to the Edward Orton Jr. Ceramic Foundation. Dr. Dickey is a Teddy and Wilton Hawkins Distinguished Professor and Department Head of MSc at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She earned a bachelor's in materials engineering from the University of Kentucky, and her PhD comes from Northwestern University in material science and engineering. As an ACerS Fellow, she is a member of the Basic Science Division and an editor of the Journal of the American Ceramic Society, and is a recipient of the Richard M. Fulbrath Award. Dr. Goski, feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. And I want to thank the organizers and the NorCal section. This is a great topic, and thank you for taking the time to bring it to the table. It's a privilege to share my time with you today. And what I was asked to speak about today is really my perspective on why diversity, equity, and inclusion matters to nonprofits and professional societies. So I'm going to keep, because of the timeline, I'm going to keep my topic a little short so you can hear more from my executive colleague on the board, Beth Dickey, on specifics with ACerS. But first and foremost, I do not purport to be an expert in this area, and we've had some great people speak on that today. But I do want to highlight what I think are some important realities. Nonprofits and professional societies have been exploring how to build their core values of diversity, equity, and inclusion into parts of their own operation, as well as to advance their mission. Why? Is it because it's the right thing to do, or is it also because it builds a more successful organization? Maybe it's both. And I think we've heard from some of the speakers today that it can be both. Yeah, inclusion is one of our 6 core values at ACerS, and our society commits to fair and equitable treatment of all. And I think that particular core value is interlinked to success with the other core values in nonprofits and professional societies: accountability, collaboration, excellence, service, and education. But you know, values written on a page are not authentic until they're demonstrated by an organization's actions. And so values must become actions. These actions lead to better transparency, better listening to voices within our community, diversity in boards and leadership. And, you know, I know there is a time lag to generate the results we all desire. So I look at this as a journey and not an instantaneous result. Anybody who's heard me speak on why diversity matters in business, I want to thank Kristen Breeder for bringing some of those specific topics up, because I like to share the data analytics from Harvard Business Review and McKinsey articles and data. It's not only good business practice, the actual analytics prove with regularity over time that companies that embrace DEI practices are more innovative and they're more successful. While I don't suggest that businesses are completely altruistic, the fact that they are more successful on many metrics is a fantastic consequence. There's a particular article from last year from Harvard Business Review where they talk about inclusion mattering and how diversity wins. And they looked at over 1,000 companies in 15 countries. And the data makes DEI efforts really compelling. They report that the top quartile of companies with really strong DEI efforts are 36% more profitable than those in the fourth quartile. So progress is slow, but it's making an impact. So what roles can professional societies like ACerS play in diversity, equity, and inclusion? Well, businesses, government, academia, all want diverse, inclusive, and well-trained workforces. One cannot hire candidates who do not apply. Professional societies and their foundations can help bridge that gap through education, through mentorship, through collaboration. And we've heard some of that discussion today. They can help inspire and encourage future generations. So I would suggest that these are inextricably linked to each other's success and that professional societies are a bridge. So on that closing note, I'd like to hand over my speaking time now to Dr. Beth Dickey to cover some more specific ACerS actions and activities. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Dana. And it's been a real pleasure to listen to everybody today and various perspectives. It's, I think each of these kind of events that I participate in, I certainly learn a lot more. And as Dana said as well, I'm not an expert, but I am an advocate and a willing learner. And I just try to make myself better through the years and then take what I learn and hopefully help organizations like universities and the American Ceramic Society to improve themselves. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a few slides to show that have to do with, and I've got my Ceramic Society hat on today. So let me just make sure I get the right version up. Okay, great. So I want to tell you a little bit about what the Ceramic Society has been doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what we continue to do, and hopefully encourage each of you to become part of this process, because I think it does take the entire organization, from the leadership to the new students coming into the organization, to really help us make positive change in these areas. So we do have a diversity inclusion statement from the organization. I won't spend too much time on this because I don't think it's unique relative to many other organizations' statements and on diversity, but talk a little bit more about what we do functionally within the organization and how we operationalize a lot of our goals and our overall vision of how we are become a diverse and inclusive organization in itself, and also the role that we play in the larger profession. So we do have a great committee whose full focus is on this topic, and you'll see that the chair is Ryan McCarty, and we have a great group of individuals from around the world and that represent both industry and academia, who help provide input and ideas to the organization, to ACerS, on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things I want to point out at the bottom right is a change that we made this year. Is we felt it was important to have a direct tie between this committee and the leadership of ACerS. And Sanjay Murthy is actually going to become the president-elect of the American Ceramic Society this fall when there's a change of leadership. And so one of the things that we did was to make sure that the president-elect nominee serves on this committee, and so becomes integrated with what this committee wants to do and its vision. And then as that individual progresses from president-elect to the actual president of the society, they are in strong communication with this group. And we felt this was an important change that we made last year. The other things that we do, and I'll actually, a lot of the visuals on my slides are from our website. So all of this I think is very easy to access from the ceramics.org website, which is the where you can get to everything about the American Ceramic Society. We do have a number of awards that are recognizing activities in diversity and inclusion, or are meant to help grow a more diverse membership. Okay, so there are awards that are helping promote our objectives. There's also if you're not already a member of it, a diversity and inclusion member community. So this is an online community that you can very easily sign up for, and their dialogue among this community happens online. And actually, we're going to have a get together at the upcoming MS&T, which will be one of our first live meetings. But we also in the meetings hope to provide opportunities for these groups to there's many member community groups, but for the member community groups to get together in person during the meetings. And then there's also a more general approach and I think responsibility we feel for promoting equity in science. So just not just in the organization of our ACerS, but in the broader professional community. And I'll highlight a couple of the things that are happening and some specific programs. One is that we started a partnership. You may have seen this, and hopefully you did earlier in the year. We started a partnership with NSBE and SHIP, the National Society of Black Engineers and the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, to work with them and have a scholarship fund that's sponsored by the ceramics community through ACerS and the Ceramic and Glass Industry Foundation. So we're starting with those two organizations. They're going to administrate the scholarships for us, but they will be coming from our community, and the scholarship winners down the road, once those are awarded and announced, we'll have mechanisms to also try to incorporate those particular individuals into the society. We have a global ambassador program, and actually this points out that to the American Ceramic Society, and a really important part of diversity is international and global diversity. So over the past about 5 years, we actually have chapters that are in other countries, and us growing our footprint across the world, I think, is something that ACerS feels is important for the health of the entire ceramics science and glass science communities. So we do consider having, when we look at representation on committees in different parts of the organization, we're also looking at how international the representation is. So the Global Ambassador Program feeds into that, and also the international chapters. There's been mentions already, and I'm glad that several people on this call serve as mentors in the PCSA program. So if you don't know about the PCSA, you should. It's the presidential, now I'm forgetting the acronym because I had to say it, but the student organization that really reports to, they actually report to the board. They're quite active, and they play a big role in our efforts in this area. And mentoring younger members of the society is incredibly important. So things are happening with the PCSA. They're also happening with the Young Professional Network, which are members after they've graduated, they're in the profession, but still very much in that early career. They may be a postdoc or early career. We also have mentoring and other professional development activities for those groups to help them feel part of the society, and also help them to hopefully be longtime members of our profession. Ceramic Tech Chat, I'll talk about next. And then we also do participate in a multi-society diversity council that includes other professional societies like MRS, so that we're all pulling in the same direction, because I think we have very similar goals, and the more synergy that we can develop across the different professional societies, I think the higher success that we will have. So if you don't know about Ceramic Tech Chat, hopefully you will look it up. It's a podcast that's comes out of the society, and it really highlights people and what people do in our community, and the results of what they do in the ceramics and glass community. It gives a very, I think, personalized view of what it's like to be in this profession. And I think those real life views into what we do will hopefully help us attract more people into the profession and keep them in the profession. So I encourage you to check that out. There are a number of upcoming events. An interesting one, actually, Sanjay and the Diversity Inclusion Subcommittee are heavily involved with, that's happening as MS&T, but it is looking at, it's a Wikipedia edit-a-thon, and this is, if you've not heard this discussion, but looking at the balance of who has wiki pages, and specifically as scientists and engineers. It tends to be heavily male dominated. And so there's an effort going on to make sure that the leaders in our community who are typically underrepresented are fully represented through wiki pages. There's also, as I mentioned, one of the communities meet and greets. We're holding it at MS&T. So those of you who are able to come to the meeting next month, we'll be glad to see you there. Dana and I will both be at that meeting. Hopefully we'll have full attendance at meetings in 2022, but we're going to give it everything we've got for the one coming up in Columbus. And also we do, as I said, we interact with other professional societies so that we're not working against each other, but we're all pulling in the same direction. And so we will also participate in the TMS meeting on diversity in Anaheim in March. So all of these things you can access on our website. But what I wanted to kind of end this with is, and I think this goes back to, how we collectively make progress in these areas, that it has to happen on all fronts. We have a lot happening to try to recruit even middle school and high schoolers into the profession, supporting people through their undergraduate studies, supporting people through those who go on to postgraduate studies, supporting students through that, and then supporting people as young professionals through the society. But there's also things that happen on the top end, and I think Kristen talked about this, the importance of leadership and having leadership that reflects the people in the organization, but also who have a commitment to improving the climate and the culture of the organization. And so I actually did an exercise, I guess it was a couple of months ago, Dana. The presidents of the American Ceramic Society, TMS, ASM, and MRS, and some of the president-elect people got together for a virtual cocktail hour. And perhaps coincidentally, every person on that call was a female. So there's been a convergence in our broader materials community where there are a lot of female leaders right now. And one of the things that I did during that meeting was went through this exercise of scrolling through the history of our society, the American Ceramic Society. And if you look back, the first president was in 1899. And this was kind of, you can see there was some evolution in mustaches and facial hair during these. So the way this goes is the earliest is on the bottom right, and then you go left and then you come back and right to left. So it's a little bit backwards, the chronology of this, but this is how it's presented on the website. So a bit of change in facial hair over those 6 years. I won't go through all of the presidents because we've been around for quite a long time. I went and looked at the society leadership when I was a student. So this spans approximately from when I joined and became involved in the ceramic society as an undergraduate through graduating in 1997. You can see we came into color photography, but actually our first president was of the society was in 1996 through 97. And then we'll look at the more modern, the latest makeup of the leadership, and you can see it looks quite different, right? So there's definitely a healthier balance of male to female. You can see we have some international presidents of the society. And so there's been quite a bit of change, okay? And I think that the change in the leadership that you see in the president, also on our board as well, we've paid a lot of attention to giving people the opportunity to volunteer and volunteer through their professional career. And I think that volunteering and becoming part of a society, figuring out where you can uniquely contribute is a great thing, but it also gives you a pathway to leadership in this organization. And I think this is a hypothesis that I would like to see somebody studied, but in highly voluntary organizations, is there an easier path for people to get into leadership positions? And I would say that's a question I have in my mind because it is largely a voluntary organization. So I'll stop with that, and maybe Dana and I can field questions together.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Dickey and Dr. Yasi. With that being said, let's take questions if they are available. And if not, Scott, you and I can draw upon our handy dandy question bank. I guess I can lead off with a first question. So how can young professionals become more involved with professional organizations? I know certainly when I was earlier in my career, I didn't really necessarily have the time or the funds to pay for a membership, but for people fresh out of college or just starting off in their careers, what advice would you have for them on the benefits or like how to join a professional society?
Oh, well, I can answer some of that up front, and then Beth might want to add on. We have I think it's actually a free year transition from school to working. And then we also have a discount if you're in certain countries that fall under, it's a particular UN index. So we've got that added as well. There's also 2 young professional networks. There's a young professional network in itself, that early career, if you want to think of it that way too. But then there's also a new industrial young professional group who is trying to focus in on, hey, their particular, they're an industry. And so we've got different brackets. And so they need a little more outlet. And so there's actually a group that's active in that area as well. And then I know Beth is working on some educational programming. So Beth, did you want to comment on that for young professionals?
Yeah, so I think just I think the financial aspects of this can be quite important, as you're starting out your career. And so I think the society has done a really good job of responding to recognizing those challenges, and so that the membership fees are significantly reduced at those important stages of your career. The other thing for students is travel funds There's resources quite often for travel funds and even for waivers on attending meetings. So we don't want anybody to not participate simply because they can't afford it. And then I think your original question is opportunities to become involved, right? So you have to be a member, that's very helpful because then you're in the communication stream and have a pathway to help. There is a volunteer network, and one of the things we try to do is get out the word on where there are opportunities to volunteer. We're in the process of developing a strategic plan for the society, and that's going to be announced at the upcoming meeting at MS&T. And part of that addresses some of the things that you're discussing about how we provide more opportunities for micro volunteering and really not just having opportunities out there, but how we communicate with the membership so it's easy to access that information and easy to get engaged. So that's definitely one of the, I think part of the goals of our strategic plan is making things accessible and easy for people to get involved and for people to find the volunteering opportunities that I'd say are most synergistic with what they're doing and what their passions are. Because I think another part of your point is people are quite busy. Everyone's quite busy, and you need to hopefully find things that fit well with what you're doing professionally and your passions, and you've got a range of opportunities that if you don't have a lot of time for one particular year because you've got a lot going on in your company, that there's some smaller things that you can contribute to. So it's a good point, and I think one that we're addressing with what we're proposing in our strategic plan.
I'll add to please reach out to the division that you are associated with. There's a lot of opportunities, like Basic Science Division is offering first-time symposium organizers funds to travel to the meeting. So just reach out to your divisions. There's I know some of the other divisions have similar programs like that. So all the email addresses and contact information is on the website, so don't hesitate to reach out. And there's other opportunities for volunteering within the divisions as well.
Great, thank you. If there aren't any more questions, we can proceed directly to the panel discussion. So just a last call for just questions for Dr. Dickey and Goski. If not, let's move on. All right, so we've reached the open panel part of the webinar. I think at this point we've talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion in academia, industry, and then also national organizations as a whole. What I wanted to do is just kind of get all the speakers together and have a roundtable discussion on anything that we had in mind or anything the attendees have in mind. So I guess we can open up the Q&As for attendees if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I have a question for our panelists. So as David mentioned, we've got people here we've got leaders in academia, leaders of ACerS, and other leaders in industry. So my question is basically from what I've seen in the news is that the COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately affected different groups. So my first question is as leaders in these different communities, do you all see these disproportionate effects within your organizational communities? And if so, what things are being done to help ease the burden on these different groups?
Does anybody want to take that first? Okay, Beth.
I'll make one comment. So this is more from my academia job. There is no doubt that people who have young children were strongly affected, because of the inability to have childcare. So my children are now in college, so they were independent, but having raised young children, I honestly don't know how a lot of people did it, because they're, trying to work from home, taking care of children who are trying to go to school maybe. It is a huge challenge for them. What universities are doing is for tenure track faculty, doing delays on the tenure clock and those sorts of things. So it has been addressed to a certain degree. Now we're faced with the challenge of making sure that there's enough childcare available. There's always, it seems, every university I've been at, there's never enough that the university itself offers, but when those organizations are having difficulty hiring staff, it's been difficult to ramp those things back up. So it's taking some senior leadership stepping in and making sure it's a priority. So that's just one aspect, I think, is the balance, the work-life balance. It's provided a lot of challenges, especially for people who are taking care of someone in some capacity, small children, older children, or maybe spouses with disabilities. Keith?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part is very true, but I also think sometimes universities, we also forget about the staff and the impacts on the staff, and many of our staff don't have the flexibility that faculty have in some respects, right? Or even control of their time. And so I think that we're still not fully clear of the impacts on staff, but I can say at UMBC, even a lot of our contractors, we use contractors for a lot of our building services, et cetera. Those companies have been really hurt very hard. Some of those employees that I know personally, because I used to be here with them every day, they're, they also have experienced, because of the fact that many of their family members work in jobs where they can't be doing what we're doing right now, right? Even during the pandemic, they've had more people in their lives who were affected by COVID, including who have died. And I think that's been a strong impact. I think the other thing that, that I learned, and I'll just speak from this piece, is talking to LGBTQ students who were out in college, who had to return to their homes where they were not welcomed by their families or not allowed to really live in their homes the way they had become used to. We did make some provisions at UMBC to keep dormitory spaces open for students who could not return home, but not all universities did that, right? So, but we actually kept a cadre of about 130 students, I think, throughout from day one on the campus. It's talking to a student who I had met previously, who's talking to me from their car, sitting out in the car talking to me because they don't feel safe to talk in front of their parents. There's not a lot you can do except be willing to listen, and I think that's really been a tough thing.
I might just point out one other thing. I assume we have a lot of students, hopefully, on the call, but the other group, I think, are graduate students. Because so I arrived in January, right? So there was pretty much, the university was pretty locked down. The people who were coming into work every day were the graduate students, right? Into a very lonely building. And being a graduate student is hard enough already. And you don't have all the social benefits of being a graduate student. That was the fun part, the friends you made, and, going out to have, breakfast at 2 a.m. after you got out of the lab. All of that disappeared. And I think it was incredibly challenging. It probably still is, because we're not completely back to normal for graduate students. And so we, tried to do a lot to have as much online social events as we have. I had open office hours, A, because I was new, but two, to give students, to let them know that we know you're probably struggling, and if you want to talk to somebody, reach out. We know that it's a difficult situation, but to let them know that there was a listening ear or ears in the department.
All right, thank you very much. I have a question. So with regards to D&I, effective communication and listening skills are critical to basically try and make improvement through this. How do you recommend people practice these skills? Because it's not like you wake up and say, okay, I'm going to try this. So I'll leave that there. Yep, Kristen, Dr. Brad.
So during the pandemic, we did some things. We did the Live Open group. We had some webinars internal to Sangaba, but because we're all online, we could have participants from all over North America. And some of us essentially, I forget, one of them, there were 3 of us, just talking about how we came out and how it has been being out in this big company and how we've been received. And one of my colleagues has a child who is non-binary and decided that as being very young. And she talked about her learnings dealing with that. So we just had essentially a roundtable discussion and a lot of participation from everybody, a lot of chat on things. So I think how can we talk about these things is to start doing it, I guess. So that's part of what we were trying to do. And it was great fun. And people started, you share one thing and people start sharing other things, and the communication started flying. I think we had about 45 people company-wide.
I had an interesting experience. We had a book club here, and I thought it was really superb. So there was there were many book clubs. You were grouped into about a group of 6, and we we did 2 different books. So you want to talk about race, and we did another one on Caste, the book Caste. And so the ground rules were, it was confidential, right? So that if somebody, and we were kind of acknowledged the fact that not everybody knows how to talk about these issues, right? And you might say something that is another person in the group might take offense to that you don't realize, but that we need to be able to talk about this and learn about it and do it in a safe environment. And part of the process was us becoming more comfortable with talking about these things and learning and having feedback, but in a pretty confidential space, right? So I thought that was enormously helpful. And the moderators of the session were trained, so they were trained on how to do these things. And I think there were people in the book club, at least in my group, that we weren't a homogeneous group of people, and there was kind of a spectrum of backgrounds from people. And I think we all found it really useful, and we didn't have to be scared about talking because we might say something a little bit wrong and we didn't quite know how to say it. We could say it, and if somebody needed to give us information, correct us or something, it was okay.
I like the theme of practicing in a safe environment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
To find that safe environment.
Another thing that the Live Open group here in Sangaba have started doing is we have generated a training program that we call ally training. So we talk about how colleagues can become our allies, and what does that mean? And again, it's about safe communications and conversations. And then anybody who has gone through the ally training now becomes a member of this sort of network of allies, and we have monthly meetups where we have a little theme that we talk about, and there've been various topics there that's again practice talking to one another about somewhat difficult topics for a lot of people. It's a great training.
If I could make 2 additional comments, kind of building off what Kristen was talking about with her employee resource group. Here at our company, we're a predominantly male environment. In late 2019, just before the pandemic, we launched our first employee resource group, which was our women's network. And so I was co-leading that. And first kickoff event, I believe, was supposed to be in March 2020. So that didn't happen in person. But what we did end up doing was we joined another group, another women's network nationally, so we could hear and discuss things. And what Kristen was saying, where you started discussing things and you had a safe space, we had some people that were really, they're having some hard times. It's the child care, it's the elder care. Women were predominantly affected by the pandemic and still are to this date. You can look at all kinds of data and it just supports that fact. And so it built up a lot of stress. And I think they needed that support group and a safe place to come in and talk. The second example, I'd say, more leans to what we've been doing with our strategic plan at ACerS and listening to the voice of the customer. The customers are members, right? And so we want to hear what's happening. We want to hear what's working, what's not working, and what direction you feel we need to go. And so there were, I want to say oodles of data, but that doesn't describe how much data was collected and then how it was sorted and then how it was assimilated and how it was digested and what the output's going to be with some really good outcomes and some action items. So it's taking in information in different ways and letting people express themselves and ask questions if you don't understand so they can explain their perspective. That's my take anyway.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Goski. With that being said, we are pretty much out of time. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to Scott for helping set this all up. Thanks to Karen for providing the support from ACerS National. If any of the attendees still have questions, feel free to include it in the chat, or you can always contact us after the webinar. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Fantastic job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So
This was
much,
great
everybody.
fun. Thanks for inviting me to participate. This was a lot of fun.
It was
Great.
fun, as Scott promised.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you on
Thank
behalf of
you. Bye for now.
ACerS. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.